You're probably watching this video because you're not sure what toilet you want to put in your van conversion. And the aim of this video is to make that decision as easy as possible. This video is sponsored by the DIY Hero van conversion course. This is a course that I made. We sit inside the demo van. We built the van to show every single step of a van conversion process in 170 super detailed videos. It has a community, and we also help you design your electrical system.
Not to say they didn't do it.
Right.
So if that's something that might interest you, follow the link and maybe we'll see you there. Okay, back to toilets. Now, the reality is when you're living in a van, there is no perfect solution for what to do with your poop. That's just the reality. It's always been a core concern of people, and no matter which way you go, there's always going to be a bit of a hassle to get rid of your feces. That's just how it is. Now, pee canisters, they're great because that's like the largest volume, especially if you're hydrating properly. You can pee in a bottle and you can dispose of that somewhere safely. However, for solid waste, it's a different matter. So we're just going to go through the real basic rundown of the key options, and then we're going to zoom in on the difference between a composting toilet and a chemical toilet and a compost toilet, and we're going to look at those in a bit more detail, and I'll share my thoughts, my experience, and what I'm going forwards with at the moment. So starting in the most low tech, you can just put a bucket. You can crap in a bucket with a bag, wrap the bag, put it in your municipal waste. Now, it's a bit basic, it's a bit smelly, it's not the perfect solution, but it kind of works for an emergency. Another option at a similar level is you don't have a toilet at all and you're always going out in the nature. And some years ago, I would say that's totally fine. But even in kind of mountainous areas, places where before you'd have very few people, very few vans, the increase of popularity of van life means that today everyone should have some way to crap inside their van. To be responsible van lifers, we should always be able to self-contain, self-manage our waste and have an absolute minimum effect on the environment and the communities that we travel to. So when it comes to toilets inside the van, we've got a few key options. And these generally broadly come under toilets which have a chemical way of managing the smells and the odors and kind of containing that, a composting toilet or compost toilets. And then you have kind of the high-end crazy stuff, which is like an incinerating toilet, but they cost like an enormous amount of money. So we're not going to cover those particularly deeply in this video. We're going to be mostly looking at chemical toilets and compost toilets and how they work. Now, the other one, which I didn't really mention for van conversions, is a grey water tank, a black water tank. This is typically what you get in an RV. I don't think these systems are that popular these days. They're quite water intensive and they take up a lot of space, and you have to be going to dumping stations because underneath you've got these two big tanks, and you first empty your black water, so it's basically the feces and water and urine, and that goes into your waste disposal place, and then you connect the same hose to your grey water and then you flush that all out. I think these are appropriate for large RVs, but I think for the van converters, I don't know anyone who's installed black water, grey water and the big hose in the DIY van conversion. So chemical toilets, we have a few options. Number one, we have an option which is built in. It's a built-in chemical toilet, and the cassette often comes in a little door out the back, so it's built against the wall. And then in the back you've got a door where you can take the cassette out and you can go and dispose that. That's a popular thing, again, more for RVs. People do put it in van conversions, but they do tend to take a bit more space, a little bit more installation, and you lose a little bit of flexibility of where you put the toilet. And because you can't move the toilet, it means if you have it as part of a shower room, now that shower room's taking up more precious space in your van. To solve the problems of a built-in chemical toilet, we have portable chemical toilets. Now these tend to have a little reservoir of water in the top, and in the bottom you have a different chemical system which will contain the odors and manage the feces. Typically the bottom will disconnect, and you can take that and you can dispose of it into a toilet or waste disposal site. And thirdly, we have composting or compost toilets. So you have compost toilets like the Nature Heads, a very popular version, and it tends to have an electric or a crank system which turns over the compost, the feces inside, and then eventually you will remove that and dump it somewhere. Now, composting toilets, again, like the Nature's Head, they're built in, they are connected to the power if they're electrically charged, or they have a crank. They tend to take a bit more space, they're a bit heavier, and you don't quite have a lot of flexibility. You have the same issues with those as you do with a built-in chemical toilet, only they're probably a bit of a better system than the chemical loo. Again, to solve the problem of a big built-in toilet and a compressed space, then you have compost toilets. These tend to be smaller and they might be fixed in place with a fan which connects to the outside to kind of allow odors and condensation to leave, or they're standalone, compact, and can be moved around. Again, the benefit of a toilet that you can move around is you can have it in your shower cubicle, and when you want to take a shower, you can take out the compost toilet or the chemical toilet, and then you can have your shower, and it just gives you a little bit more options for what you do with your space, and keeps your shower room, often a big loss of space, you can keep that down to the minimum. Now, to give you a firmer understanding of a chemical toilet versus a composting toilet, we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into two toilets. This one here is a Thetford porta potty. It's got a reservoir at the top, a reservoir at the bottom, and this one that I've been using for a few months. And we're going to look at the Trelino composting toilet, which is a fantastic little product. And the aim of this is to give you an understanding of the pros and cons of a chemical toilet versus a composting toilet, how they work, how you operate them. And at the end of that, I'll give you my verdict for what probably is the best path forward, depending on your different situations and what you need in your van conversion. Okay, so first we're going to have a look at the chemical toilet, and I'm going to explain how it works. And to do that, I'm going to use the other one as a seat. So this chemical toilet works in two ways. One, it has a reservoir at the top. This is the flush, and at the bottom we have the reservoir for the waste. And basically it has a sort of collection area, and when you want to flush it into the waste container, you open this, it falls through the hole, and voila, it's in the bottom container. The flush is activated by pump this handle. Now that makes the flush fluid go down the edge and into the pan, and that kind of helps clean it. And you can top up the flush by undoing this little cap on the top. So you have two chemicals in a chemical toilet. You have the rinse, which goes in the top, and you have the blue, which is the bottom, which goes with the waste. The downside of a chemical toilet is the chemicals themselves smell quite a lot. I mean, they smell better than feces, but it's still not great. Now, when you want to empty your chemical toilet, you have to disconnect the top from the bottom, and there's a lever in the back to do that. That allows us to disconnect it. As you can see, we have this tube at the bottom, and this tube at the bottom allows us to empty it into a toilet or correct place to dispose your waste. Now, essentially what you're doing is this, you're taking off the cap. Now, I won't do it here because there's actually waste inside it. You empty it out into your toilet, and typically you should flush it out. You can put it back and then essentially put it on the top, the same way you took it off, and then you got your toilet back in operation. The downside of a chemical toilet is the flush doesn't work amazingly well, so it's kind of a little bit hard to keep it clean compared to like a normal toilet. It does have some odor, especially the chemicals, as I said. Now, the other key downsides of a chemical toilet is that it's kind of heavy and it uses water. So obviously, as this fills up and gets to full, it's got a little indicator tell you when it's getting full. Then that's all of that is kind of water, obviously, and urine. And the top part also needs water for the flush. And if the top's kind of full and the bottom's kind of full, it's going to weigh a fair bit. And if you have to move it awkwardly out of places, maybe it becomes a bit difficult for some people. The other thing is you do need to dispose of the waste liquid because it has chemicals in it. You've got to dispose of that in a correct waste disposal place, whereas with a compost toilet, got a little bit more flexibility. Other than that, let's face it, chemical toilets are a tried and tested long-term companion of van lifers and campers throughout the world. They do work, they work reasonably well, but just because it's been used for decades doesn't mean it's the best product out there for van life. So this brings us on to a composting toilet like this one. This is a Trelino Evo Small. They come in different sizes. I prefer a smaller toilet because I'm not using it dedicated all the time, and it's nice to get it very easily lifted out of the shower area. Typically my toilet lives inside the shower area, and if I want to shower, I basically need to remove the toilet from the area because it means I can keep the space a lot more compact. So a small portable toilet makes that a lot easier. Now, we have all the space we need to have a shower. I think the other really nice thing about these super compact toilets is very, very easily fit in drawers or in little cupboard spaces. So where the chemical toilet has the chemicals, a composting toilet has kind of sort of a sawdust or a peat moss compost or something like that, which helps dry out the feces and helps it get into that composting mode. Now, the way a composting toilet works, obviously if you have the urine and the feces together, it's not going to dry out. So what you have is inside the toilet, you have two canisters, one which is a separator so it collects the pee, and the other one is for the solids. The urine container has a rubber diaphragm which allows urine to go through but prevents smells from entering, and if it's sloshing around with the van driving, it also stops any leaks coming out of the actual container. And it's the lid that does the separating. As you can see here, we have kind of two areas, one which collects urine and that goes down this little hole into the urine canister, and then the back part which will take the solids. Now, the nice thing about compost toilets is essentially when it comes to dispose of the waste, because we're using a little bin liner and that sits inside, when you come to dispose of it, you just take that bin liner, you tie it tightly and you put it in normal municipal waste. And you might think that's a bit weird, but in most places it's no different than a nappy. Millions of tons of nappies and feces are disposed of in normal bins every day, or probably every year, and essentially we're not doing any different when we're disposing of organic waste. Obviously you're not putting tampons in there or other sanitary products. This is just a wrap up. It's just got toilet paper, it's got feces, and it's got your bulking agent. To use the toilet, all you're essentially doing is sitting down, you're peeing, the pee goes into the pee canister, the solids go into the back, and when you've finished, you'll just give it a liberal sprinkle over the solids of the bulking agent, and that's it. A key concern people have with composting toilets is that don't they smell? And if you're doing it right and you're using the bulking agent, they don't smell. And it seems odd, but the reality is, because the way they work, because it separates the urine from the solids, it dries out, the bulking agent helps that, and you should have little to no smell in your toilet area or in the toilet itself. It's pretty cool. Now, I've used chemical toilets before, and I bought this one before I went away on a quite long trip, and what I didn't realise is that the flush seal, it wasn't welded properly and it leaked, so I wasn't able to use the top, and I was away on a long trip, so it's very hard to return a thing internationally. It's just like, you know, you lose basically. So not very happy with the quality of this product because it didn't work, but I'm sure that's not a normal occurrence. So the chemical loo, it's all right. It does get heavy lifted in and out. It is more of a hassle to dispose of it. So I've pretty much switched now to composting loos, and the Trelino Evo product I think is pretty damn good. It's very neat, it feels very strong, it's very cool because it has a soft close lid. It's a bit absurd, but it's very nice, sort of thing slamming around. And like in general, especially when you take in consideration the actual disposal of the compost, I think it's a better system for van lifers, especially if you're concentrating on space, especially if you're looking for something which is like not maybe every single day use. Now, I will say that when I use either toilet, I always use a pee bottle because I hydrate a lot. I go through like liters of tea every day. So it's much better for me to use a pee bottle and dispose of that rather than fill this. So for me, I think the optimum solution for van conversion is a composting toilet combined with a pee bottle. And I think that definitely works if you're young and you're willing to rough it a tiny bit. You know, you do have a toilet, you've got all the mod cons in your van. I think if you're a bit older and you don't want to rough it, I would probably look for a bit more of substantial composting toilet. So like the Nature's Head, which is built into the van and all the rest of it, or a kind of much more substantial built-in chemical toilet where you take the canister out the back and you dispose of that properly. I think for 70 to 80% of van lifers, small portable composting toilets, which super easy disposal of waste, pretty efficient, lightweight, and allowing dual use of space. I think products like the Trelino composting toilets, they're probably the way forwards, and it's certainly the direction that I'll be going in the long term.